was here that last May, a young Air Force mother and 2 of her 3 children were found brutally murdered.
She got killed, and 2 of her daughters got killed.
And charged 3 counts of murder in the first degree and 1 count of sexual assault.
Was it as gory as they say it was? Yes.
3 murders had taken place in the quiet town of Fayetteville, North Carolina. The crime scene was the victim's own home. The murderer had deeply cleaned and fled the scene, and the only witness, a 22-month-old baby. The Eastburn family, a family of 5, lived in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Gary Eastburn was a captain in the U.S. Air Force, and his wife Catherine, or Katie, was a housewife. They were a loving couple who had 3 daughters together: 5-year-old Kara, 3-year-old Aaron, and almost 2-year-old Jana.
How would you describe the family that lived next door to you? What kind of people were they? Close-knit family, military family?
In 1985, Gary got a new job at an Air Force base near London, England. But first, he had to attend 10 weeks of training at a squadron's officer school in Alabama, about 500 miles away from his home and family in North Carolina.
Gary Eastburn, Captain Gary Eastburn.
Since the Eastburns would be moving to London soon and their daughter was still in kindergarten, Katie and their 3 daughters, with their dog Dixie, decided to stay in Fayetteville while Gary was in Alabama for those 10 weeks. Also, due to the upcoming move to London, Katie decided to rehome their dog Dixie and give her to another stable family.
Family matters, like putting their dog Dixie up for adoption, fell to Katie, who had been alone with the girls for 2 months.
She ended up giving the dog to a young family in the area on May 7th, 1985. Now, while Gary was away, Katie and him missed each other very much, and despite the distance, they kept in regular communication. They would write letters to each other, keep each other updated, and talk on the phone every Saturday at 8 a.m. It had been 9 weeks that Gary had been in Alabama, and his wife never missed a call until May 11th. Gary got no phone call from his wife, Katie.
That was the night I called her and she didn't answer the phone.
Concerned, naturally, he called multiple times throughout the day while at work and got the answering machine every single time. So as any caring father and husband would do, he called a friend to go to the house and check for him.
Somebody came by last night about 11 o'clock, rang the doorbell and asked me if I had heard anybody or I haven't seen Katie next door. Apparently her husband had called and couldn't get a hold of her and called the individual who came up here last night. And I said, no, but I don't think any problems exist or anything like that.
The friend went, saw nothing, no one answered the door, so that's when Gary turned to the police to go do a welfare check. And later that day, an officer went to the house, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so the police just moved on with their day. The next day, on May 12th, Mother's Day, Bob Seafelt, their neighbor, went to make a visit to the Eastburns' home and noticed a pile of newspapers at the door.
I seen the newspapers out there, so I put them up on the back porch, and I said, let me go and check. Ring the doorbell.
When he knocked on the door, the only thing that answered him were the cries of a baby coming from inside.
Nobody came to the door, and then I thought I heard a baby cry, and I said, what?
Thinking that it might just be his imagination, he asked his wife to come over and take a listen.
And I said, listen, if you can hear Jana crying. She says, yes, that's the baby crying. I says, okay, go ahead and call the sheriff's department.
She confirmed that the noise was indeed of a crying baby and that it was coming from inside the Eastburn house. They were the cries of Gary's youngest daughter, Jana. The Seafelds called the police, who broke into the house through the baby's bedroom window because they saw her crying in the crib alone.
So he cut the screen, and then the window opened real easy on the inside, and the baby was right inside there.
They popped the window open and handed the child over to the neighbors and asked them to give her something to eat or drink, as she seemed extremely dehydrated and malnourished. The bundle of newspapers stocked up at the doorstep and a neglected baby was enough for the cops to judge the abnormal state of the Eastburn home. So they went in further to investigate the rest of the house. When they entered the master bedroom, they were greeted with a horrific sight. A stench of rotten flesh, bloodstains on the bed sheets, floors, and walls, and decomposing bodies of 2 individuals. One of the bodies was laying on the floor next to the master bed. It was 3-year-old Aaron Eastburn. There was a pillow covering her face, and when the investigators removed it, to their horror, they saw Aaron's throat slashed and her head almost completely severed from her body. The other body belonged to Katie. She had been stripped, sexually assaulted, stabbed 15 times in the chest, and had her throat slashed. Down the hall, 5-year-old Kara was found stabbed to death in her own bedroom, and it was clear that the victims had been dead for days.
Was it as gory as they say it was? Yes.
The investigators started collecting evidence from the crime scene. It included fingerprints, footprints, blood samples, hair samples from the room, and semen from Katie's dead body. Luminal tests were also conducted, and they revealed that the murderer had cleaned up the crime scene before fleeing. Pretty well, too. Later that same evening, Gary was on a flight back home, worried but still unaware about the death of his wife and 2 daughters.
And I was in the dorm room and someone said, "Hey, Gary, you got a phone call." I go, "Oh, good, it's her." He said, "Some detective." First thing I said, "How many of them are dead?" He wouldn't tell me anything. He just said there had been a death in the family.
It was until he landed, a police officer phoned him to tell him the horrific news.
I remember how emotional he was, and he kind of broke down.
Later, the disturbed father and husband was taken to the crime scene to his own home to help the investigators by checking to see if anything else was missing from the home. Gary told them that an envelope with $300, Katie's ATM card, and a paper with the ATM pin were missing. Detectives started interviewing people acquainted with the Eastburn family. The family's babysitter, Julie, had last seen them on Wednesday, May 8th.
I went with her to the fair this past Wednesday.
She also told the officers that recently Katie had been getting very strange phone calls.
She was getting some strange phone calls that she
Julie, don't be giving no ideas who did something.
I ain't giving no ideas about. Will you just look?
No,
I'm telling him what he wants to know. You know, she's been getting strange phone calls, that may connect with this or they may not,
The person calling would make uncomfortable and sexual comments towards Katie, and they had no idea who it was.
Hello?
Some days into the investigation, a young man who lived in the neighborhood named Patrick Cohn came forward with the claim of being a witness. He informed the police that at 3:30 a.m. on May 10th, 2 days before the bodies were discovered, he had seen a tall white man with blonde hair walking on the driveway of the Eastburn home. The man had a mustache and was wearing jeans, a knitted cap, and a black members-only jacket. He also witnessed the man driving away in a white Chevy Chevette. With Patrick's help, the police made a sketch of the suspect and revealed it to the public in hopes that more witnesses would come forward. Meanwhile, the police were also tracking Katie's activity on her ATM card, which had been used twice after she and her daughters were murdered. Both transactions were withdrawals for $150, summing up $300 taken out of her bank account after she had been dead. Records also showed that a lady named Lucille Cook used the machine less than 4 minutes after Katie's card was last used. Police asked her if she saw the person in front of her, and she confirmed that she did. According to her, the man she claimed to see resembled the sketch released by the police. But despite these 2 witnesses' claims, the police had no idea who the suspect was or how to find him. So with hopes of finding more information about what was happening in the lives of the 3 victims before the murders, Gary informed the police that Katie had recently given their dog away while he was in Alabama.
Earlier today, authorities issued a press release requesting information on an individual who apparently picked up the family pet Dixie.
So the police went to the media and requested the family who had adopted their dog Dixie come to the police station for an interview. And they did. On May 15th, 1985 is when 27-year-old U.S. Army Sergeant Timothy Hennis walked into the police station, and when he did, he turned many heads because of his uncanny resemblance to the sketch.
I stopped dead in my tracks.
They realize he's the spitting image of the composite.
The police interviewed Timothy and asked for his reason to come. He told them that he and his family had adopted Dixie and he was there in reference to that. During his interview, he told the police that he had last seen Katie on Tuesday, May 7th. The police asked about his alibi, where he was the night the Eastburn girls were brutally murdered, and he told them that night he dropped his wife and newborn daughter off at his in-laws and then went straight home. The police took fingerprints, saliva, and blood samples from Timothy, and he was interrogated for hours before finally being allowed to go home.
The detectives' interest grew even stronger when they escorted Hennis and his wife to their car, a little white Chevy Chevette.
His face resembled the sketch, his car fit the description given by the witnesses, and he was acquainted with the victims. It couldn't just be a coincidence, right? The police thought. So they called in Patrick, the man who claimed to have seen the murderer. The police put pictures of 6 men in front of him and asked him to identify the man he had seen that morning. Without hesitation, Patrick picked Timothy. All the evidence thus far was pointing towards this man. Believing that they had connected all the dots, the police got a warrant and arrested Timothy from his home for the murders and rape of Katie and the Eastburn girls. He was set on a trial and charged with the triple homicide and rape, but he pleaded not guilty to the charges and maintained his innocence for now. He challenged the police to prove him guilty when they get in court by comparing his DNA to the DNA samples found at the crime scene. But before we get to the first court trial, as Timothy's mugshot was going all around town, more people started to come forward with information. His ex-girlfriend came forward saying that on the night of the murders, Timothy had come to her place. She said they talked for a while before he tried to make a move, wanting to spend the night with her, but she refused, and he left. Thus proving that Timothy's alibi, claiming that he went home and went to bed after dropping off his wife and kid at his in-laws, was false. A dry cleaner in the area came forward with the claim that on Friday, Timothy came in to drop off a black members-only jacket, but she said there was nothing suspicious on it, like blood or anything that looked to be from a murder scene. Timothy's landlord also came forward and told investigators that Timothy was behind on that month's rent, and coincidentally, after the murders, Timothy wrote him a check for the rent money he owed him. The amount? You guessed it, $300. The same amount withdrawn from Katie's bank account after she had been raped and murdered.
You told me that y'all were out in the yard Saturday and you saw him burning some stuff. What did you see him burning?
He took the trash can from the corner in the yard down there and brought it up to the house, and he had flames going all the way up to the roof there. We don't know what he burned, but it was unusual.
Lastly, some of Timothy's neighbors came forward as well, saying that they saw him burning things in an oil drum.
Didn't look like it was trash he was burning.
No. I don't know what it was, but it was something he burned.
They said they never seen him do that before, and really they didn't see a need to do it because they had regular trash pickups. The police actually investigated the oil drum when they heard about this, and it was noted that they found remnants of cloth, like possibly towels, shirts, or bed sheets. Now, let's get to the first trial. Timothy's lawyers argued that no physical evidence pointed toward him. Remember that luminol tests were done at the crime scene, showing that whoever committed the crime had spent some significant time cleaning up the scene before leaving. So with the DNA that they had and tested, the results came out inconclusive. They cannot be used to determine whether or not the DNA at the crime scene was Timothy's. And the semen they found in Katie's dead body, well, it didn't serve any purpose at that time because in the 1980s, DNA technology was not that advanced and semen tests were not yet possible. But despite there being no hard physical evidence shown at the trial, Timothy Hennis was found guilty of all the charges and was sentenced to death. This sentence was based only on witness statements.
Hennis lawyers feel the jury's decision was based more on emotions rather than the evidence in the brutal murders of Catherine Eastburn and two of her children.
Everyone thought that justice had been served and Timothy's fate had been sealed, but time would prove everyone wrong. Some months after the trial was over, a suspicious letter was sent to Timothy and the police. The letter read,
"Dear Mr. Hennis, I did the crime. I murdered the Eastburns. Sorry you're doing the time. I'll be safely out of North Carolina when you read this. Thanks, Mr. X."
The police considered the letter to be a hoax, but Timothy's lawyers firmly believed in its authenticity. They submitted an appeal for a retrial. The appeal was granted, and in 1988, Timothy and his lawyers were back in court, better prepared than the last time. This was the first time in American history that a person on death row was granted a retrial. This go-around, his lawyers planned to attack the character of Patrick Cohn, the prime witness. During this trial, Patrick was labeled a liar. Timothy's lawyers, with the help of a meteorologist, proved that the night of the murders was too dark for Patrick to claim with certainty that he clearly saw Timothy. The lawyers also pointed out that Patrick had a criminal record and had legal problems during the first trial. They wanted to make it so that Patrick and his statements would have no credibility. And after all that effort, the lawyers won the case, and Timothy was proven not guilty.
After more than a month of testimony, the jury found Hennis innocent on triple murder charges.
He was now a free man.
It also raises questions in the minds of some as to whether or not authorities are turning loose a criminal or setting free a victim.
Timothy narrowly escaped the death sentence given to him based on very weak evidence. Many thought that he was fortunate to have a retrial after being pronounced guilty for a crime he supposedly never committed. He was given another chance to live. Gary and Jana were not given closure and justice was not served. Fast forward nearly 2 decades, the case remained cold. Gary and Jana had moved to Washington, where he remarried and ultimately moved on and accepted what had happened in the past, until a phone call was made. And it brought back those haunting memories into the lives of Gary and Timothy once again. In 2006, Gary received a phone call from the police department informing him that they had found strong evidence that could help finally solve the murder of his wife and 2 young daughters.
This is going to be a swab from Catherine Eastburn. It would be the vaginal swab.
The vaginal swab.
With the help of new technology, the semen collected from the crime scene was tested, and the DNA of the semen matched the DNA of none other than Timothy Hennis. However, Timothy could not be sent to court because of a law that states if an individual has been found not guilty of a crime in court, they cannot be tried again. So it seemed like Timothy had escaped from the hands of the law once again, or almost. See, when the murders happened, Timothy was serving in the military. This meant that Timothy could be charged in the court of the military instead of a civil court. The Army called him back to duty and charged him with triple homicide. On March 17, 2010, Timothy Hennis was in court for the 3rd time, and the defense was unable to refute the strong DNA evidence. And on April 3, 2010, Timothy Hennis was yet again found guilty of rape and triple homicide. As death sentences could no longer be given in military courts, he was sentenced to life. He now has to spend his remaining days in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
I just feel like justice has finally been done.
For the family that once lived in the house on Summerhill Road, it is finally over.